Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment, the unconventional pastor, Mr. Bob Greaves, is going to be talking about feelings. But don't worry, he's going to try oh so hard not to be a drama queen.
Well, good evening. I'm Bob Graves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. Great to be back with you again tonight and to chit-chat with you a bit about tonight, feelings, and talking about emotions. Now, part of the reason I'm doing this, there's a few reasons. One of them being is that Dr. Jones has reminded me about how useful it is to take certain talking points that might not be as commonly understood or embraced, and to discuss them repeatedly in different times so that they tend over time to begin to sink in and make more sense. And my understanding and the things that I teach about human emotion are things that tend to be a bit not only countercultural, but particularly countercultural when it comes to people who have a background in a very rigid belief system. Most of the people who listen to me on this show are people who at one time probably had a strong allegiance to a very rigid and traditional kind of faith, but no longer do. And of course, one of the problems you can have with that is that while you are caught up in a tradition that you are beginning to try to embrace and spin everything in the direction of upholding it, you not only are doing things that that later will not make sense to you, you're not doing things that are giving you the kind of a background to understand better what should have made sense to you earlier. And as a result, my experience has been that a lot of people, in a manner similar to myself, I heard something come on. In a manner similar to myself, a lot of people find that their understanding of emotions is something that was impeded by their Christian faith, by what they understood about emotions. And of course, there's a wide variety of attitudes that one might have. It's not as if there's just one view of emotions that Christians hold on to, but or that Bible-believing fundamentalists or evangelical Christians hold on to. However, I do find that there is this this certain cultural attitude, which, by the way, although I say countercultural view, I don't mean counter-academic. Our culture tends to have a certain attitude about emotions that is not really shared by the academic community that studies emotions. The academic community that studies emotions tends to talk among themselves. A few of them will write books, but for the most part, a great number of people in the culture at large simply continue to follow the notions and fads that are simply a part of our culture, and are not always aware of what it is that the latest research and understanding of the emotional apparatus of the human brain and of our biology and our neurology, they're not necessarily aware of the implications that this brings. And sometimes this even takes time to work its way through the mental health community, so that a person who's, say, been working in the mental health community for 20, 30 years might be operating on some of the assumptions that were very popular back when they were going to college and that they've been working with in their own career, and still operating on those assumptions, which no longer necessarily stand. So there are a lot of reasons why emotions can be something that we don't really understand well. And my experience has been that people who are devoted to a very rigid or extremely traditional religious mindset tend to have an attitude about emotions that's almost 150 years behind uh, academia, so that they really have some catching up to do. Now, let me share with you some of the attitudes that I find to be absolutely incorrect, that are commonly shared sometimes among Christians. Sometimes they might tell you that it's wrong for a Christian to be sad, or to be discouraged or depressed, or to feel like they're under the circumstances. What are you doing under there? Um, and there can be this kind of shame for feeling that way, and asking people to feel differently in a way that might honor the gospel and might honor Jesus and honor God. And so they might try to point out how your feelings are wrong. They might think it's wrong for you to be happy when things go your way, and wrong for you to be happy when things go very badly for your enemy. Now, I'm going to certainly think that there can be problems with that, but I'm also going to argue that the problem isn't with the feeling happy part. That's not where the problem is. Not to say there isn't a problem when that kind of thing can happen. Some people think that it's wrong to enjoy being praised. Some people are very awkward and uncomfortable when somebody pays them an excellent compliment because they feel this isn't appropriately humble for a Christian. Some people will tell you that it's wrong to feel good about having done something very well, better than others do it. Oh, and to feel good about the fact that you might do something better than others might do it if you happen to be particularly skilled at it. Some people might feel that it's wrong for you to be angry, and I think this is a very common one. And although I think that anger is often expressed in a manner that is inappropriate, being angry is something that I'm going to strongly argue is never, ever wrong. Even people who have anger issues and anger problems, I'm going to argue they have some serious problems, but anger is just the way that problem that they have shows up. It itself is not the real problem. It's a facade over the problem. And so I may continue on. There's some other things that people will say about feelings and emotions. They think that it's wrong to feel good about yourself unless you can do that in a way that you can relate it to who God is and what He's made you. Almost as if you're supposed to feel disgusted with yourself unless, except for the fact that God loves you through Christ, that you have to find a way of putting on the Jesus mask so that when you look in the mirror, you can love yourself because of the way you think you can see Jesus in you. But the real you that you're familiar with and intimate with is someone you really must despise and dislike. Some people might think that it's wrong for you to enjoy sin. I'm going to argue that that's absurd, that there may be problems going on and things wrong when you're enjoying sin, but the fact that you're enjoying it is not the problem. Yeah, some people think that it's wrong for you to feel envious or jealous. It's wrong for you to feel like you want to do nothing or being lazy or slothful, and that this is the way you feel. I just don't feel like doing anything right now. Don't want to, and many people would want to argue from a Christian standpoint that sin has warped our emotions. Now, I want to say something that I know will be misunderstood when I say it. And the reason it's going to be misunderstood is because I'm actually coming from a very different paradigm of understanding emotions. And when you're working from a different paradigm, something that may seem to be true in one paradigm can be something which is understood as false under another paradigm, depending on the paradigm you're using. And so sometimes when you're shifting to a different paradigm, you still use the old paradigm to determine whether or not something is true or false, and that ends up falling apart on you. And if you didn't understand what I just said, don't worry about it. We'll clear each step up as we talk about it specifically. But usually what happens is as we as people grow in our insight and understanding, we occasionally come to moments in our lives where we shift radically the way we understand something. But it doesn't happen all at once. We shift radically in the way that we understand something, and then we kind of have a time where we work that through. And while we're working that through, we find ourselves thinking both in the new way and the old way without realizing it. We kind of have to work through all of the conundrums of that and iron them out a step at a time. And this will be true when if you experience a different way of understanding human emotion. You will find yourself, while working that out, kind of obeying the insights and understanding you used to have, while also trying to obey and understand the new insights that you've adopted, and it becomes real messy. That's just part of the process of change. And so this can happen. So let me tell you what I was going to say, that I want you to understand. Chances are you're going to completely misunderstand what I mean by this. And here's what I'm going to tell you. It is impossible for a human being to feel something they should not feel. It is impossible to have an emotion you shouldn't be having. It can't even happen. It's not even possible. There is no such thing as an emotion that is wrong, ever. It can't happen. There's no such thing as an emotion that you can't depend upon entirely, completely, and 100%. I'm going to argue that emotions are the most honest thing about you. But the problem that we have with emotions is that we don't understand what they are a response to. And when we don't understand what they are, what they're a response to, our complete misunderstanding befuddles the clarity, and it causes us to say all sorts of things about emotions that simply are not true. There was a time in our culture where all people, not just Christians, believed that emotions were inept reality detectors. Reality is this way, but you might feel that way because, well, your emotions aren't really all that dependable. But I'm going to argue that is an entirely false statement. When reality is one way and your emotions are another way, the entire explanation for that has nothing to do with whether or not your emotions are inept. It has something to do with the history of your perceptions that your emotions are actually a response to. You see, I'm going to argue that your emotions are not a response to your environment at all, ever, in any manner whatsoever. Your emotions are actually a response to you. And specifically, they are a response to what you are doing in the way you perceive and experience your environment. So in a sense, emotions are a reflection of your perspective. They're not a reflection of reality. And the only reason why emotions have any correlation with reality at all is because you are paying attention to reality to a certain degree. Maybe not entirely well, maybe not always honestly, and maybe not with a history that's always been informed or clear. But I'm going to argue that human emotions are a reflection of you and not at all aware of reality in any manner. They are not in touch with reality. They are in touch with you. I'm going to argue that there are 4 things that precipitate your emotions. Let me tell you what those 4 things are, and then let me make an argument to clarify what it is I'm saying. First, your emotions are a response to what it is you are focused upon. If there's something you're not focused upon, even in the peripheral of your thoughts, you can't possess any feelings about that whatsoever. So in order for you to have any sort of emotions, it must be about something that is within the focus of your attention, even if it's, kind of in the back of your mind. So your emotions are a reflection of what's on your mind, what's in your focus. And there are a number of things in your focus, not just that which has dominance within it. There are overtones and undertones and harmonics and all sorts of other things we could metaphorically speak of, so that you're quite conscious of a great number of things simultaneously. but you're incapable of having any emotion about anything that is totally outside of your focus. You can't have feelings about something you are completely oblivious to. The other thing that your emotions are also affected by is your perspective. Your perspective is shaped by your history of the various objects that might be in your focus. And you have a history with everything that has ever been in your focus. And it is that history which causes you to, for various semiotic reasons, assign and attach meaning to the objects that you are familiar with in your reality. And that your emotions are a reflection of that history in terms of what you really buy into as to what its significance really is, in terms of what you are thinking and what your perspective really is. So your emotions are not only a reflection of what's in your focus, it's a reflection to your history and the perspective that you have gained over time about the objects that are currently within your focus. And let's see. I thought I heard of a viewer comment coming in, but no, I guess I didn't. Anyhow, I see what happened there. That's let me X something out of there so I don't hear that little beep again. Where was it? Okay, so your emotions are not only a response to your focus, they're a response to your perspective about the objects that are in your focus. There's something else that also constrains what your emotions will be, and that is your particular aptitudes and capacity to perceive reality. You can't have feelings about things you're unaware of and can't possess the ability to be aware of. If there's something that's over your head and you don't even notice it, you don't observe it, you don't even realize it's something that might be significant, you can't have any feelings about it because it's something that is if you, for example, if you're not any good at math, if you're really lousy at math and you know that you have $800 in your checking account and you get a bill for $900, you're not going to be the least bit upset if you don't realize, wait a minute, I'm shy $100. If you can't do the math in your head, this information isn't going to affect your emotions, because if you're no good at that kind of math, you're not going to be aware of the fact that there's something you could emotionally respond to. So your emotions are limited to your capacity to observe and perceive reality for what it is you think it might be. And the last thing that your emotions are a response to is your condition of health. Biologically, there are certain emotions you're incapable of precipitating. The emotional apparatus within you is not capable of generating an experience of certain emotions based on certain conditions of health. If you are extremely sick to your stomach, dizzy, throwing up, and you feel miserable, and you hear good news, you might find that your state of health is one where you can consciously be aware of the fact that what you just heard was good news, but it's kind of hard to feel good about it right now because there are other things within your health that are dominating you. We can inject you with certain chemicals that can make you feel anger or precipitate various other emotions. And this alters your physical condition, as it were, where the emotional apparatus is forced by laws of nature to be precipitating certain things. And that's going to happen. So your emotions are also a response to your conditions of health as they affect the emotional apparatus and its ability to function. So those are the four things. Your emotions are created entirely by your focus, your perspective about the objects within your focus, your state of health, and your capacity to perceive reality. If I understood what you're in, and I can't because this is a huge task, but if I was capable of talking to you and I understood just exactly what it is you are capable of appreciating and not capable of appreciating, what it is you're capable of understanding and not understanding, and if I understood your condition of health and how that affects your emotional apparatus, and if I knew what objects are actually within your focus, and I knew what your history was with those objects and the significance you've attached to them, I would know exactly how you feel, and it would make complete and perfect sense to me. I wouldn't even have to know anything about the current reality. By knowing those 4 things, I would understand how you feel and why you feel that way. Now, let me try and make a good argument for why I'm saying that your emotions are not a response to reality. If someone were to say something to you that is absurdly offensive, but when they say that to you, you don't get it. You don't realize how offensive they're being, and you don't realize you're being offended. Are you going to feel offended? Of course you can't. It's not possible for you to feel offended if while you're being insulted or put down, if you don't realize that's what's going on. If you don't perceive it, you won't feel offended. What if somebody is saying something to you that isn't a put down, but as you hear it, you're taking it that way? Are you going to feel offended? Absolutely. Why? Because that's what's happening? No, because that's how you are perceiving what's happening. So when you realize that our feelings are based on what we perceive reality to be, not what reality actually is, this helps us to understand that the way we feel is not a response to your environment. It is a response to the way you're perceiving your environment and the significance you apply to what it is in your environment you are perceiving, constrained a bit by your capacity to make sense of it and your current state of health. Knowing those things, it's impossible for you to feel any other way. In fact, I'm going to argue that all emotions are 100% involuntary. You can't help but feel exactly the way you do when you feel exactly the way you do, given your state of health, given your capacity to appreciate what reality may be, given your history with the reality of the objects in your focus and where your focus is. You can't feel any other way. What this means, therefore, is this: there's never anything wrong with any emotion. It's impossible. It can't be. Trying to manage your emotions is ridiculously absurd. You can't do it. Nobody can. Not only that, it doesn't even need to be done. This is not to say that there aren't problems that manifest themselves through the emotions we seem to be going through. But we need to look for the problems somewhere else. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. If you're feeling a feeling that is uncomfortable, this might be a good time for you to ask yourself, what am I focusing upon? Is my focus honest? Am I dismissing certain things from my focus that I really should be paying more attention to? Am I paying attention to certain things within my focus and giving them emphasis that they're not really worthy of? What is it that I understand these things within my focus to really mean? Am I being honest? Is that their real significance? If I can question my perspective, if I can alter my focus, I will feel differently automatically. It's impossible to not feel differently when you do that. What about if it has something to do with your capacity to perceive? Where's your education? What are you aware of? What is it you know? Do you still remain ignorant about things it would be good to understand? That in understanding them would help you to appreciate certain circumstances in a very different way. Maybe you need to get some education in that. Maybe you need to grow or mature. Or maybe even your state of health. Maybe you need to take better care of yourself. And maybe you need to be more honest with, in some sense, what your homeostatic condition of health is. Some people are perhaps biologically more predisposed towards, say, being depressed. If you find that you are biologically more predisposed to being depressed, then this means you need to be honest with yourself about that predisposition and realize you, unlike others, may have to actually work harder at being honest about your perspective. And if you do that, you can succeed at it. Just like a person who is not that awesome a singer, but wants to learn to sing better than somebody who seems to just have this natural gift at singing. If you're going to become a good singer, you might have to work harder at it than the person who does it naturally. But, you might be able to really do that. And anyhow, we do have a viewer comment here. Viewer comment: I agree that we have limited short-term control over our emotions. But for those who have issues with anger, there are breathing exercises that can soften that anger as well as shorten its duration. In addition, education, practice of breathing control, and distraction techniques allow us to control and permanently augment our emotional behavior in the long term. This is absolutely correct. But notice how this particular technique is an application of what I'm talking about. The breathing exercises are altering your state of health. They are altering even the amount of oxygen that is in your bloodstream. They're altering aspects of that. The other thing that you're doing here is that with these other anger management issues, the education, the practice of breathing control, distraction techniques are a way of altering your focus. And so many of these techniques that people use to regulate their emotions are really various different attempts to alter the four things that precipitate emotion. And that is why they are effective. And that is why they're ineffective when somebody attempts to alter their focus in a way that their focus can't be altered. Or if they try to change their state of health in a way it can't be changed, or if they're, so it is important to realize that that these are the sort of approaches that we bring. One thing you can't do, you can't change your anger simply by trying to change it. That isn't ever going to work. Can you please just briefly repeat the four things, Bob? Sure. These are the four things that affect your emotional state. Your emotional state and condition is precipitated as a reflection of what you are doing with reality. It is not a reflection or a response to your environment. And the four things within you, the dynamics that precipitate this, are these. Number one, your focus. That which you have, that you are currently aware of in various different degrees. And your perspective, that is the history that you have with all the objects that are currently within your focus and the significance you, through your history, have told yourself ought to be attached to those objects. So your perspective, and this is a biosemiotic dynamic. Then the third thing is your capacity to perceive reality, and this is a function of, first of all, your IQ, which is not going to change, but also the degree of education to where you have learned the sophistication of relevance of the various things you might be able to be aware of, and to know how relevant they may or may not be. So that's your capacity to perceive reality. And the last thing is your current state of health. That is the biochemical environment in which your brain is marinating at the moment. And based upon your general state of health and the kinds of energy, food, sugar, various other biochemical balances that are going on currently within your body. Those four things are the only four things that end up precipitating the particular emotional state you have. And if there's ever anything wrong with what's going on emotionally, your emotions are merely the manifestation of the problem. They are not the problem itself. Now, true that if a person is raging and angry, this is a sense in which there's a fire. And of course, if you see a burning building, there can be a real issue that there's a fire in the building, and we need to get that fire out. But the truth is, fire doesn't just happen. Fire happens whenever there is heat, fuel, and oxygen. And the problem of fire is those three things. And the way to put out a fire is to find some way of altering the oxygen, altering the fuel, or altering the heat. And that's the only way to put the fire out. And so that's how we put out a fire. And the same thing is true with the anger. The way to put the anger out is by finding a way of legitimately and authentically altering your focus. Legitimately and authentically altering what it is you think the things within your focus mean. If you think that something means that you're being distant, being treated abhorrently, and that you have a right to just, if you perceive your rights and yourself and the circumstances that are arriving at you as constituting certain circumstances and as requiring certain responses, well, as long as that's what you perceive, your emotions are certainly going to drive you towards the apparently appropriate response. And perhaps you need to change your perspective about who you are, or what's really going on, or what it is you need to be dealing with, or what rights other people really also do have, et cetera, et cetera. Some people may have to realize that it could be a biochemical problem, and this can happen. And so you might need to do some things to improve your health, or possibly even alter your blood chemistry. And also, in terms of your capacity to perceive reality, maybe you need to do some growing up. Maybe you need to start to look at situations with a far more mature awareness and appreciation for what's going on. And I'm telling you this, you cannot change what it is you're feeling until you do something that begins to alter the way these four dynamics combine. Now, it may be true that an emotion that is out of control becomes very difficult to regulate. This is another reason why it's important that we recognize that our behavior should not be something that takes our feelings seriously. We should take our feelings seriously. By the way, here's one of the things that may seem counterintuitive. I'm going to argue that every emotion you feel is something you need to feel, and you need to embrace it, and you need to embrace it until it has accomplished what it can accomplish. And if you don't, those feelings are only going to get buried under there, and they're going to be a part of a smoldering fire underneath you that holds on to a constant consciousness of your focus that is a constant company to you, even at some low level. It's going to maintain a certain perspective that is just not working for you. It is going to maintain a certain ignorance about how things really ought to work and how they really do work. And it's going to keep you kind of stewing in a biochemistry that is only there's only predisposed to a particular attitude. There's no way out. So there's times when our emotions need to be regulated, and there are things we can learn to do, because you see, you can't always change your focus immediately. You can't always change your perspective immediately. That takes time. It takes history. It takes really thinking things through. You can't just do it out of simply experimentally and keep that. You can experiment with it and assess the experiment and its outcomes, but it takes time to alter one's perspective. It really does, if it's going to be authentic. And even changing your state of health, depending on the emotion, that can even take time. Even during the breathing exercise, you have to take the time to do the breathing and what have you. But we need to regulate our emotions. I find that here's some ideas that I've learned that help me to regulate my emotions in a manner that I found very successful. First of all, I have discovered that if I have a feeling that I don't want to feel and I resist it, there's something going on inside of me that's kind of like working against me, saying, okay, well, maybe I'll let you win now, but I'm coming back later and I'm going to get you. And it's like these emotions inside of you, they will not go away until they get what they came for, as it were. So there is no future in deciding you're just going to ignore how you feel. No future in it at all. However, this doesn't mean that, well, since there's no future in not feeling it, let's just suck it up and feel it right now. I'm going to feel all of it as, you can put a feeling into a parenthesis where you can make a promise of integrity to yourself. I'm going to deal with this at a more opportune time, but I am going to deal with this. People in leadership often must find themselves doing this, and people who develop this ability oftentimes can excel at leadership. Something happens that might bother you and anger you, but we need to do something about it now, and we need to do it without the anger. I might decide I'm going to think about this through. I'm going to embrace this anger later. But right now, I have to make some important decisions that are going to respond to the circumstance for what it is, not just how I feel about it. And a good leader can learn to do that and respond in a situation very differently than how they may be feeling. And they can even temporarily set those feelings aside. In fact, the more skill you have at that, and by the way, you can only temporarily set feelings aside if setting them aside is something that's temporary. You must return to them, and they'll come back all by themselves if you really let them. But by doing that, you can also become adept at something else. By putting those feelings temporarily into a parenthesis, you can now begin focusing on other things. And I'll tell you, this can be a very strong aspect of leadership. For example, what if you're talking to somebody, and let's go back to this issue of anger, and something they're doing or saying makes you angry? Well, in order to deal with this person, being angry at this moment in time might be very counterproductive. However, by being able to put that anger into a parenthesis to deal with it later, you might now be able to refocus on how precious and valuable this person is in other respects, so that you can just honestly feel a great deal of love and compassion and empathy and understanding for the situation and the problem they need to work on and solve while you deal with them about that, and you'll deal with your anger later. And sometimes that can help you. It can be very disarming to a person who looks up to you as a leader to see you be able to respond to them about something you do feel anger about, and they know that you feel anger about it, and yet you're still responding to them in a manner that is genuinely and authentically empathetic. And you can learn to do this by putting it later into parentheses. Now, here's something else that I'm going to tell you I find very helpful. I believe that people, when they behave in a manner that isn't appropriate, they need to be held accountable, eventually at least perhaps, for what it is they do. But one thing that people do not need to be held accountable for, and that it will be counterproductive for you to try to hold them accountable for, is this. People don't need to be accountable for how you feel about what they did. If this is particularly true for leadership, if somebody's doing something that they shouldn't be doing, we need to deal with the fact that they're doing it. The fact that I don't like it is my problem. It is not their problem. And in fact, if I'm trying to get them to make me happy, they're going to be spending too much of their energy trying to make me happy and not enough of their energy learning what it is it's going to take for them to change what they're doing. So if I really care about them changing what they're doing, I'm not going to heap on top of them also my problem of how I feel about it. But this brings me to something else. It is never a problem to feel what you feel. That's never a problem. What if somebody does something that makes you angry? Well, let's look at it. Does my state of health allow me to be angry? Well, then I'm supposed to be angry. Does my education and understanding and a capacity to be aware, is it allowing myself to properly have the capacity to adjudge a situation as something that is unjust or inappropriate? Well, then I should be angry. And what are my perspective? Are my values correct? Am I appropriate in deeming certain things as things that shouldn't be violated or assaulted, and yet they are? Well, if that's so, then I should be angry. And what if my focus is in balance, that I'm paying attention to enough and a sufficiently broad enough aspects of facts that I'm not being angry simply because I'm ignoring things? If that is true, then I should be angry. And if I should be angry, what should I do with that anger? Feel it. There's nothing else to do with that anger but to feel it. I don't have to do anything about it. I just have to feel it. And if I feel that anger, I'll discover that that anger does something for me. It confirms my focus as being balanced. It confirms my perspective as being well thought out. It confirms my state of awareness as being sufficient to the situation. And it confirms that I'm in a good enough state of health that I'm capable of being angry about things I ought to be angry about. It is my privilege and my honor to be appropriately angry. So consequently, it isn't a problem. And because it isn't a problem, there's nothing to solve. And that's why I don't have to cause anybody else or even me to be responsible for my anger. If there's a situation that's making me angry, I need to start dealing with the situation. And the anger doesn't need anything from me other than to be felt. Now, if I am dealing with certain emotions, also, I can work this back. For example, let's just deal with anger because it's the question that came up. It's impossible to feel angry unless I'm actually focused on something that I perceive to be unrighteously being violated. It's impossible to feel anger that way. Therefore, if I have a proper focus, if I have a proper perspective, then angry is what I'm supposed to be. And as soon as I have felt that anger, I have confirmed that which is proper and good. Now, let me ask you this. What if you are a valuable human being and somebody is assaulting your dignity as a human being and you're not angry? There's something wrong. But it is your problem, and it is a good problem to have, if you want to call it a problem. It is confirming your dignity. It is confirming your value. Now, what this person is doing in assaulting you, that needs to change. That's their behavior. So we can deal with that. Also, it is important that I realize that I can be more transparent about how I feel when I realize that how I feel belongs to me. I own it. It's my responsibility. I find that even in times when I'm in a position of leadership and as a professor, there are times when students are not, working with the assignments. And I don't always like that. I don't have to like that. But when a student can see that how I feel about some of the ways they're slacking off has nothing to do with any issue I have with them whatsoever. It helps me to begin focusing on, so what's the problem here? What's keeping you from getting this assignment done and all this? And I can work with it in that kind of a context because I own as my responsibility how I feel about things. It gives me an opportunity to see that. Now, as I was saying, working backwards. So since it's impossible for me to feel anger unless there's something in my focus and perspective, when I'm angry, that is an opportunity for me to be honest. If I'm feeling angry, I need to start being honest about myself. There's something, whether I'm focused on it immediately or somewhere in the back of my mind, that I'm paying attention to. And whatever it is I'm paying attention to, it is something I perceive as being unjustly assaulted or violated. And so consequently, based on how I feel, that can reveal to me certain things that probably must be so within my focus, my perspective, my capacity to perceive, and my my biochemistry, my current state of health. And as a result, my emotions are information I can use to do a verification and a validation of, okay, let me do a quick, how's my focus? How's my perspective? How's my capacity here to perceive the situation? How's my state of health? It gives me an opportunity to be honest about that. And here's where I say owning and embracing all of your emotions for what they are really a way that help us to be honest about our circumstances, our situation, and what it is we are or are not doing about them. And so in that sense, our emotions are a way where we can summarize our perspective to ourselves in not words, but in sensations of feelings, so that we can be honest with ourselves about what's really, about what we're really doing with the reality that we are dealing with. And therefore, consequently, emotions are your experience reflected back to you by you. And this is one of the reasons why I find it so helpful to understand this about emotions. Now, we began this by my talking to you about some of these things that people think it's wrong to be sad. You can't be sad unless there's something about your focus, your perspective, your capacity to perceive, and your state of health that permits sadness to be the thing you're feeling. And when you're feeling sad, you might discover that based on your focus, based on your perspective, based on your capacity to perceive the situation, and based on your state of health, sad is exactly what you should be. It's good to be sad. It really is. No emotion is ever an enemy. It really isn't. The more you think of it as an enemy, the more you're going to be trying to do something about it that ought not to be done. And if you find that you're sad and you're not really being honest with your focus, not really being honest with your perspective, well, wonderful. Being sad is something that can help wake you up when you go through that routine check and discovering, oh, I need to change my focus here. I'm just obsessed about something here. I'm looking at something. I'm not really looking at the big picture. And making those changes of focus is something that is a process, and you might have to give yourself time to go through that process, and you might have to even learn some techniques to facilitate that process. But knowing how you feel can help you be honest with yourself about where your focus must be, about where your perspective must be, about where your state of health must be, about where your capacity to appreciate situations must be. And if there is a problem, that's where the problem will be found. In your focus, in your perspective, in your state of health, or in your capacity to perceive a situation. Those will be always the places where the problems that need to be dealt with in emotion will be most dealt with effectively and truly resolved. And anything that ends up being proper and healthy in those areas will precipitate in you an emotion, no matter how wonderful or how unpleasant, that you really need. That in the end really is a confirmation of your dignity as a human being, of the values that you embrace, of the real value of the things you lose as well as the things you gain. And in that kind of a context, all emotions can be extremely healthy, and they are yours. Own them as yours. Don't put the responsibility for owning them on anybody else. And don't let people who have their own feelings escape the responsibility they need to experience in terms of their own focus, their own perspective, their own state of health, their own capacity to perceive a situation. I'll help them to find, when people come to you with emotional issues, help them to begin to be able to assess that in themselves so they can deal with these things more successfully. Anyhow, that's about all the time we have, and that's what I just wanted to share with you. Thanks for listening in. I hope that this gives you an interesting insight into the world of emotion and how to embrace it and own it and regulate it and deal with it. Until next time, this is Bob Greaves, the Unconventional Pastor. See you then.
Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed the drama queen. I mean, the Unconventional Pastor. What an amazing speaker he is. He just, he moves me, I can't control my emotions. Anyways, stick around. In just a moment, Dr. Jones is going to be on the stage speaking with Christian Luca, Nick Albertini, Michael Fulford, and Sean the Sean. That's right, the very one. We'll be speaking about young earth creationism and other topics, and it's going to be a fun night, and we're all going to have a blast. So don't leave us.